discussing today's topics from an African American perspective. This is Another View.
It's the last weekend of the summer season, and we thank you for spending some time with us here on Another View. Welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee, and before we get started on our show today, I just want to say it has been an incredible week this week, and I just want to mention two things very quickly. First of all, I had the awesome experience of spending a day with the teachers and faculty and folks for Norfolk Public Schools. They had a big rally, back-to-school rally earlier this week. I Am Norfolk Public Schools was their rallying cry, and I tell you, it was so uplifting to see everyone with their T-shirts representing their individual schools, and they were all cheering and just really getting ready for the school year. So I know we hear a lot of not-so-good press about Norfolk Public Schools, but I just want to say, you know what? Those folks are ready to teach those young people, and they are ready to get back into that classroom. And if you could have been there to see the enthusiasm of the folks who are on the ground every day. So I just want to say hats off and a huge shout out to those teachers who are teaching our young folks. We wish you the very best this school season. And then yesterday, I was just so honored to serve as the convocation speaker for Virginia Wesleyan College. It was an incredible experience to speak to the class of 2019, the freshman class, and also faculty, students, and upperclassmen, and everyone was there. The president, the new president, Dr. Scott Miller, and others, and everyone just treated me so incredibly well, and we had a great conversation. I hope we did anyway, and at least the feedback that I got was all very, very positive. And so to all the family over there at Virginia Wesleyan College, thank you so much for the warm welcome, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. So, as you know, on Another View, we discussed today's issues from an African American perspective. Now, sometimes we get a lot of flack for that. Listeners have told us that we are divisive, that we do more harm than good because we talk about race and racial issues. But the vast majority of listeners who I meet with when I'm out in the community tell me that this show allows them to hear a perspective that they otherwise would not hear, and that it has led to greater understanding. And that has always been the goal of Another View, to have another view of the African American community with the hope of leading to greater unity. America is at a racial crossroads, and now more than ever, we need to talk to one another, not yell at each other, but really talk to one another. So Another View has partnered with Virginia Wesleyan's Center for the Study of Religious Freedom and the Fort Monroe Authority on an initiative called Race, Let's Talk About It. We're going to tell you all about it on today's show. Please welcome Kelly Jackson, Associate Director for the Center for the Study of Religious Freedom at Virginia Wesleyan. Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Barbara. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Michelle Woods-Jones, Executive Director with the Hampton Unity Commission. Hi, Michelle.
Hi there. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Eric LaVille, Assistant Professor and Director of the Hampton University Pre-Law Institute and a regular here with us on Another View. How you doing, Eric?
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Good to be here.
And joining us by phone is Jonathan Zur, Executive Director of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hi there. Good to chat with you today.
Thank you, and thank you so much for giving up some of your vacation time. We appreciate you being with us. And Glenn Oder, Executive Director of the Fort Monroe Authority. Hi, Glenn. So happy to have you with us also by phone.
Glad to be here, Barbara.
And also thank you for giving up some of your vacation time, too. We really appreciate this. So you all are joining us all of us are coming together to make this initiative, Race, Let's Talk About It, happen. And I'm going to explain the relationship in just a moment. But Kelly, let's talk a little bit first, you and Glenn, as representatives of our two partners, to talk about why you're joining with Another View to help us with this initiative. So I'm going to start with you, Kelly. Why is the Center for this Study of Religious Freedom joining with us to do this initiative?
Well, what the center really tries to do is bring people of diverse perspectives together to help inform them about issues and also to transform, to change hearts and minds, and to understand why religious freedom is a basic human right of daily significance. We try to promote the values of mutual understanding, respect, and reconciliation. And these are values that are important to race relations as well. And we try to model formats for respectful dialogue that will equip people to then go out into the community and engage in these tough conversations. So we look at this as an opportunity to really promote the core values of what we're doing.
And Glenn, why the Fort Monroe Authority? How does this fit with your mission?
Well, our mission, Barbara, is to preserve the property and tell the history at Fort Monroe, and also to become economically sustainable. So we are excited to partner with WHRO on this issue because, first off, it's of local and regional and, of course, national importance. And we think that the property at Old Point Comfort, which we often refer to now as Fort Monroe, plays an important part in the history of African America. It's incredible to think that in 1619, of which we're actually coming up on the 400-year anniversary of that time, the first Africans that were delivered to our country departed here and arrived at Point Comfort, which is now Fort Monroe. It's also amazing to think that 240-odd years later, at the outbreak of the Civil War, the first three people that were not returned as slaves or as property were at Fort Monroe. And eventually, then, once the decision was made to declare these escaped slaves contraband of war, and the word spread through the slave community, over 10,000 slaves sought their emancipation under the guns, the land that was protected under the guns of Fort Monroe. It's an incredible, march of freedom that took place at this property. We ask ourselves the question at Fort Monroe is, if we were to continue to tell this story, if we could make this story the one that it is of national and international importance, this March of Freedom, how could that help our country? Where else can the story be told? Where else would it be more appropriate to tell the story? And so the idea of partnering with WHRO and hosting this conversation at Fort Monroe, we think is part of our responsibility at Fort Monroe, and we're excited about it.
Fantastic, and we really appreciate that opportunity. So let me let the listeners know how this is going to work. We're going to be conducting 4 conversations between now and June of next year, where we will start the conversation here on our air during our regular Another View show. And then we will continue the conversation in the community during a town hall session. So there will be 4 town hall meetings, 4 shows that will correlate with that conversation. And the first one actually will be held at the One Love Festival on the campus of Virginia Wesleyan College, and that is September the 26th. It's a Saturday, and that town hall will be held from 2:30 until 3:30 in the afternoon at Boyd Dining Hall on the campus of Virginia Wesleyan College, and we'll repeat that information in just a little while. That topic will be the flag is down, now what? And the idea of that conversation is to talk about symbolism and the difference between symbolism and bringing down symbolism versus the whole idea of changing hearts and minds. So that's going to be our first topic of discussion. It is free. It is open to the public, and we want everyone to be able to come out and join in a true discussion. Now, part of this discussion, we felt it was very, very important that we have discussion that leads from just talking to true understanding. And the reason that we have our guests on the show today is we've put together a stellar panel of experts who work in the field of racial justice and racial understanding. And so the people that you meet on our show today, Michelle Woods-Jones, Eric Clavel, Jonathan Zur, and who was unable to be with us today, Dr. Mavel Velasco from Virginia Wesleyan. Those 4 individuals will be at each of our town hall meetings, and they will help us in guiding our discussions. They're not there to be experts on the discussion. They are there to guide the discussion so that when things come up or if people get stuck in the conversation, then they are there to help us to interpret what's making us stuck. Michelle, I want to start with you then to talk about what are some of the things that make it uncomfortable for people to talk about race. You know, and just before you say that, there was a CBS News poll that that I referenced in the beginning of the show, where they were just saying that is one of the biggest issues that people have about talking about race. They feel that it is a very, very tough thing for people to do.
Certainly it is. When you think about the history of race in America, it is not a love story. It is not an easy story. It's a painful story. It's a painful story from the perspective of having lived it through your ancestors, whether you were the slave or the slave owner. There aren't very many people who want to say, you know, I was a slave owner and I feel so good about beating the hell out of them. These are very difficult topics, and they're multidimensional. Often when we talk about race, we talk about it without the understanding that we experience it through a wide variety of different lenses, based upon our experiences, based upon the kinds of information that we have had, our opportunities to interface with a wide or small variety of different kinds of people, and our own sense of wherewithal about race. Mm-hmm. Few people are just bigoted because they want to be bitter. The majority of the time it's out of ignorance, lack of information, or to a large extent, it is simply a result of not having good experiences that would allow them to be more multicultural in the way in which they behave and relate to other people.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, do you notice that, because I know you deal with a lot of young people also, but do you notice if there is a difference in the conversation between African Americans and whites versus other races when there is a discussion about race?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that's happened over the last few years, particularly in Virginia, has been that we've had to broaden our conversation about race. So at the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, when we have high school programs and we've had conversations on race in the past, it has primarily been a black and white conversation. And in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we've had a growth in the Asian population, the Latino population, in terms of students, high school and middle school in particular, attending our programs. And while their experiences, if I'm Latino or I'm Asian, can be in some ways comparable to the experiences of folks who are black or African American, there are also a lot of differences, a lot of nuances in terms of the treatment that folks have, the history that Michelle introduced into the conversation. And so we are starting to see among young people a broader conversation. That doesn't mean the issues have changed or gone away. It just means we have to expand how we understand a conversation on race and race relations.
Mm-hmm. So, but is the rhetoric the same? Do you, I mean, in other words, because what I'm trying to get to, and Michelle, you can jump in on this also, sometimes from the African American perspective, and I'll speak from what I have heard, some people in the African American community say they feel like, and I'm trying to make sure I say this in a way that people can understand, that there is sometimes an encroachment, I guess, if you will, that sometimes if you bring in another group of people, if you say like the Hispanics may experience something this way or Asians experience something this way, that it's almost like you're minimizing what black people have felt about an issue because it's not the same. Does that make sense, Michelle? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, very much makes sense because it isn't the same. Pain is pain, no matter who experiences it. That certainly is the same. But the root of the pain and how it manifests itself and how one integrates the process of that is very different. And I think that one of the reasons there is a reluctance to be hospitable about this conversation when talking about it from a variety of different perspectives, especially with baby boomers and some Xers, is that the story that they need to tell has not been heard. And they are faced with an onslaught of denials about their experience. And so it's almost as though, wait, let me tell my story, let me be heard, let what I have experienced be acknowledged, and then it's your turn. So I think it's a lot of unfinished business, and therefore fear that my story will really not be understood in the way I need it to be understood, because you'll go off now and worry about the Native Americans or about our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender population, and you will forget that my story has not been acknowledged.
What do you think, Eric, will be one of the major benefits of having town hall conversations like this?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me thank all of the stakeholders, Virginia Wesleyan, WHRO, and others that would come together to have this conversation and to sponsor this event, because it's very timely and it's very needed. One of the major benefits, I believe, there are going to be many, but one of the major benefits is the ability to have an honest, open conversation. A lot of the African-American history has been hidden. A lot of African-American history has been purposefully withheld. A lot of the African-American history is history that does not want to be told by the white majority that controls the information in which we receive it. Why is that? As it was stated earlier, a lot of our history and American history is very, very, very tough. There's some really bad stuff in there, okay? But one thing about issues is that when you have an honest conversation about whatever issue it is, it allows parties and individuals to open up, put their guards down, and open up for understanding, for acceptance, and really, really reconciliation, and an opportunity to understand all sides and to see why people feel the way that they feel. One thing that, in the African American community, I feel that community feels slighted a lot within America as a whole, is because if you look at every facet of America, where what is considered the American dream, economically, social, upward mobility, the right to own businesses, ability to live where you want to live, and so forth, African Americans have been marginalized in that particular area. Okay, there are other groups, non-white groups, that are able to come into America, and because of various public policies, or what we call set-asides, which that you really can't have, legally you can't have set-asides, but public policy that helps individuals secure business loans and things of that nature, they have an opportunity to come in for upward mobility. And if you look in the African American community, just as an example, you'll see that what do African Americans own? What stores do they own? Are the stores in those major communities owned by African Americans, or other people who are of color, but none who are not white? So, you have a lot of individuals in the community that feel slighted, a lot of individuals in the community that feel as if, why isn't my story being told? Lastly, I know in the courses that I teach, I bring out a lot of historical information, because in order to understand court cases and policy and so forth, I look at it through 4 spectrums: historical, socio-economical, political, and also legal, to understand how the decision came about. And what I get at the end of every course, end of every class, is how come I wasn't taught this until now? And so it gives us an opportunity to see why things exist the way that they exist.
Kelly, you want to say?
And I was just thinking, based on what Eric is saying, that these conversations are so important to bring people from diverse perspectives together, and they're so important for white people and for the majority groups, and whether that's race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever, it's really important for the majority group to listen to the group that's being marginalized or discriminated against and really try to understand their feelings, their hurts, and then to ask themselves, how am I complicit in this discrimination?
You know, I want to ask you a question about that too, and I want you and Jonathan particularly to answer, since you both happen to be white. But I'm really curious about this because in our discussions within WHROs, we were talking about this initiative and how it would play out. There was some question about whether or not white people would participate. And I really would love to get you all's perspective on that. Let me start with you, Jonathan.
I think white people are critical to conversations on race, but critical to participate in some of the ways that Kelly just described, that if we are going to be able to move past feelings of guilt or shame or anger or blame or those types of things, to come up with some productive actions, all of us have to be at the table. It's also important to understand that there are times where it is not groups of color, African Americans and others, responsibility to have to do all of the educating of white people. I have some agency and some responsibility to learn for myself, to understand for myself, to educate myself. But I think, and there are going to be spaces where I have to honor and respect the fact that groups of color need to not meet with white people, and that's okay. But I need to be part of the conversation if I'm going to be part of the solution.
Kelly, you want to respond again? Any more to that?
Well, and I think, we talked when we were having some planning meetings, and we talked about wanting all voices there, even
and we do. We
even
really do
people
want all voices.
who might not feel comfortable and may harbor feelings of discrimination. And I think the important point to make is that we're not coming together to argue. This is an opportunity. Everyone needs to, leave that their arguing hat at the door and be willing to open up and listen, and to feel like it's a safe space, and to try to understand the other person's perspective. I think if we have an agenda or a goal here, it is really to promote mutual understanding and to create this sense of empathy. So I think it's important for people of other races to understand why a white supremacist feels the way they do.
Exactly.
Yes.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Would you be comfortable? Would you come out and participate in our town hall discussions? We sure hope you will. That is the goal of this. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. And if you're just joining us, we're talking about our latest initiative here on Another View. It's called Race, Let's Talk About It, and it's being done in partnership with the Virginia Wesleyan Center for the Study of Religious Freedom and the Fort Monroe Authority. Our guests today are Kelly Jackson with Virginia Wesleyan, Michelle Woods-Jones, Hampton Unity Commission, Eric LaVille with Hampton University, Jonathan Zur, Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, and Glenn Oder with the Fort Monroe Authority. I don't know, do we have any phone lines? Yes, we do. Mark joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Mark, you're on the air.
Hey, good afternoon, Mrs. Lee.
Hi.
And to your guests. The thing is, these conversations, are helpful, but what happens is many times is that we try to really make nice instead of being truthfully honest. And give you a perfect example, like we got the Black Lives Movement ongoing. And then people say, well, all lives matter. And then that puts, black people in a position where, maybe I shouldn't be as vocal to this, conversation. And the truth of the matter is that I think we need to understand that we can be pluralistic in an American society. Meaning, for the perfect example I can give you is the Jewish community. They got it right. They don't have a synagogue on every corner. And they basically support their own. And there's nothing wrong. That makes sense. It makes all the world in a sense. So just now you see the Iran nuclear deal issue. The Jewish community isn't being shy about the idea that they have an interest in Israel. They should have an interest in Israel. And so I think it takes every ethnic group to say to themselves, what is it that I'm petitioning? What is it that I need? What is it that my community is suffering? And be able to boldly and proudly be able to advocate for itself. And there's nothing to apologize about that. It's not about excluding anyone from the conversation. It's just a honest conversation.
Okay, Mark, thanks for your feeling, and we hope that you'll come out. We'll make sure that you guys know when and where to show up. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, Eric, you wanted to respond to Mark.
Sure. I wanted to respond to the first part of Mark's statement where he stated that we try to make nice about it and become pluralistic and so forth. If you notice, our media in America as a whole really tries to avoid the honest conversation about race because, honestly, it's an indictment against white America, okay? If we look at what happened in the Jewish Holocaust, we're always pointing our fingers at the Nazis, which separated themselves from the Germans. So they're pointing their fingers at the Nazis. However, the Nazis said, well, you're treating your blacks, just as worse or even worse than we're treating our Jewish people. And, I mean, look at the example of Jesse Owens, okay? He destroyed the makeup of what Hitler said was the perfect person, Aryan nation, really by himself. But when he came back to America, he was treated as less than human. So it's very hard. For the most part, it's a hard conversation to have. And when you're dealing with something that's hard as the legacy of slavery, that's the legacy of Jim Crow, that's the legacy of de facto segregation and segregation, I mean, you really have to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I am a benefiter. I benefit from these actions, and I want to help change this. Or I have been implicit in doing of the wrong that others have experienced and so forth. You even look at the election of President Obama. The day after he was elected, we're like, oh, we're colorblind society or whatever, post-racial. That's that term, post-racial. Hey, after about 3 months, it was like, you know what? We're not post-racial. As a matter of fact, we're worse because that election emboldened the hate groups to speak, and really poison. And what I call the miseducation of white people. There's a book written, it's a classic, The Miseducation of the Negro. Well, white America has been miseducated through every facet of society. We start first with the Constitution, okay? Told that, all men are created equal. However, we're going to marginalize these people, okay? They're not human, they're not animals, but they're 3/5 of a person, okay? We're also going to marginalize Native Americans. We're going to marginalize women also. So white males have been given this authority through law and also through their beliefs and sometimes religious beliefs that they are the dominant race in this particular country and in the world. I also believe that, race, we talk about it was mentioned earlier about race being black and white. Well, race in America and the world exists within those extremes. White or European and white American or black, African and African American. Everyone else falls in between. And you have to make a choice on which side that you're going to be on. Okay, and within that particular middle exists all types of other issues. But individuals make choices because of those two extremes. I believe, and this is my true belief, if we solve the race problem in America, we can solve the problem across the world.
Wow.
The race problem across the world.
That's a pretty heavy statement. My goodness, Michelle.
Yeah, I also want to caution us not to be naive, to think that, in fact, white people will want to come to an event where they have to relish experiencing shame and hurt and blame. These are very difficult emotions. And for what? What do they get out of going through this very difficult experience? One of the reasons that we put so much time into training and development is that it's important to have a readiness stage, if you will, to allow people to develop the tools, the understanding, to widen their lenses so that they can separate their own individual personal egos from the discussion. Because if I come to a gathering in which I'm, preparing myself to feel bad, to be in pain. I'm not going to come to that event with an openness, willing to look for creative ways for having a better world tomorrow. In fact, I'm not going to come. Mm-hmm. But if we are able to craft this experience in a way that people leave there with something for themselves, then we will be successful. Why come? The reason I feel, and I will hush up, that it's worth coming is that not resolving this problem is destroying us, not as a people. Mm-hmm. Every child who is left behind is a loss to this country. We used to be number one in terms of education. Every child. The deficit models in which we communicate get in our way of being truly the best we can be in all the various arenas. That's the payoff.
The way that we plan to introduce topics that we're going to be discussing in our town halls is that we're going to be using video from a show that many of you out there may be familiar with that has been done by the ABC network called What Would You Do? And hopefully many of you are familiar with it, where a scenario is set up in a restaurant or out on the street or whatever, and they use actors to depict a scenario, and then they ask people, or they observe regular everyday people and ask the question, what would you do? And that's the way we're going to present topics, so that no one is it's an easier way, we believe, to present each of the topics that we're going to be talking about, so that we can get the audience to talk about what would you do. We're not presenting what we would do, but to ask people, what would you do in this situation, to get the conversation going, and then hopefully from there it will help us to go into conversation about that particular topic. And by the way, the topics, we have selected the 4 topics for our town hall. So the first one, as we said, is the flag is down, now what? The second one will be white privilege. The third one is race and politics. And the fourth one will be race and religion. And the months, we will have the first one in September, the second in November, the third in February, and the fourth in April. And we will get you those specific dates, but the first one will be September the 26th on the campus of Virginia Wesleyan at Boyd Dining Hall, September the 26th from 2 until 3:30 p.m. Kelly.
I would say just following up on what Michelle said, that for white people, we are not trying to play the blame or shame game, but rather to change the story. We can acknowledge our history and the facts of our history, but we need to change the words we use to frame our thoughts and our feelings and our experiences, and learn to talk more in terms of our interdependence rather than our separateness. Mm-hmm. And the world is much different than it was 100 years ago, and with transportation and communications, we are truly interdependent, yes, mm-hmm. across the globe. And if we don't do this, we're really going to be in trouble.
We're going to be in trouble, yes. And that's what causes me to feel excitement about this process and the way in which we are framing it, that it is not an experience that people have to steer away from, because we're looking at using it as a segue into exploring the ways in which we can be different together and more effective together.
Absolutely. And Glenn, this is also, as you said, an opportunity for us to use history also in terms of bringing it forward to today. Is that right? And that's why
it's been very exciting to hear so many people talk about this topic in reference to history. In fact, this discussion has made me even more encouraged about our vision for Fort Monroe and the role that Fort Monroe and the National Park Service can play as we go forward. I've had a chance as the executive director over the last 4 years to travel to several of our historic sites in Virginia. It's been fascinating to see that the most significant improvements in those historic sites has been under a theme that I would say is called making the invisible visible. And so at Monticello and at other sites, landscapes are being changed. Historic gardens, or what appears to be historic gardens, are being removed. And they're being removed, and what's being put back is the actual slave quarters and the gardens and the slave conditions that the slaves lived under in those historic sites. So I really think there is a move among our historic sites to play a role in telling this history. I'll also tell you that when I first got to Fort Monroe and we were interviewing public relations consultants, one of them was a man who was a Jewish man, and he had just learned the history of Fort Monroe. And he was so exclaimed in the meeting. He said, my Jewish culture, we tell the history. The grandfather tells the father, and the father tells the son, and the grandson watches the whole thing. We do ceremonies every year, so we know our history. He said, Black America doesn't know their history. And he said it all started right here at Fort Monroe. Now, I'll just close by saying, 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't own Fort Monroe. It was owned by the Army. And it wasn't the Army's mission, to create ceremonies and lectures and discussions like we're having today. But the idea that now the Commonwealth of Virginia and the National Park Service now jointly own this property, this is our generational opportunity to create an environment at Fort Monroe and at Old Point Comfort where we can tell the history of the arrival of Africans to our country, and we can also talk about how they came here also seeking their freedom at the exact same site where their slavery was introduced.
I have to tell you, Glenn, I'd never learned this history when I was in school either. I'd learned it when I moved here. Just before we get to line one, Eric, you wanted to make a comment?
Sure, very quickly. Hi, Glenn. This is Eric.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah, Glenn and I have had extensive conversation about Old Point Comfort, Fort Monroe. And I agree, in looking at the historical perspective, what I want to come out of these talks is to bring out history and the ability for individuals to be intrigued to go find out about it. And the reason why, think about it. He said African Americans don't know their history. Well, African Americans are highly dependent upon the wealth of America, which African Americans helped to build, and the public policy of America, which white America for the most part dictates in order to learn the history. Because if African Americans learn their history, that means white Americans will also have to learn African American history. And what would that history give you? That history will give African Americans self-confidence. It'll give African Americans pride about themselves and the ability to say, I matter. And is that something that really white America, who's privileged, wants?
Well, that's a whole nother discussion now, Eric. Behave. Let's go to Barry in Elizabeth City. Hi, Barry. You're on the air.
Well, thank you. First of all, I really enjoy your Friday things because it makes people think.
Thank you, sir.
And what I kind of want to, with race relations, some of the things, I'm retired from the U.S. Submarine Service, and we had African American, you name it, Pop Maury. One thing we had very close was we didn't tolerate any, bigotry, racial bigotry, basically, because we depended on each other for our lives. But more than that, we respected each other and we learned about each other's particular background. If the rest of the country could do like we did in the submarine service, I think things would be much better going along the way.
Okay, thank you so much for the call. He brings up a very good point because the military really take the lead in terms of integration and in terms of making those changes. Do we have another phone line? Let's see. Let's go to Joyce in Chesapeake. Hi, Joyce. You're on the air.
I'm Joyce Sadeka White from Chesapeake. I support your cause. I would like to go to these forums, and if possible, I'll be bringing a group.
Fantastic, Joyce. Thank you so
That's
much.
great.
That is wonderful.
Looking forward to
That's
meeting
wonderful.
you.
We look forward to having you join us, and we will make sure all the information will be posted on our websites as well as on the websites of our partners, and we'll make sure that we get the word out. So keep your eyes and ears open for us. Okay, thank you very much for supporting us. We appreciate that. So I wanted to ask Jonathan, young people, do you think we can get young people out? And do you think that young people today are well, let me rephrase that. When I look at the young man in Charleston, who was 21 years old, if I'm not mistaken, and I think about he had to learn his brand of thinking from somewhere. And then I think about the young people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, are we making progress or aren't we in terms of race relations and young people?
I think we're making progress, and we have a significant amount of work still to do. I think one of the big ahas that I've seen in working with middle school and high school students and even college students has been that they maybe have a heightened ability to interact one-on-one with people from diverse backgrounds, but they still don't fully understand one another's stories, and they don't understand the institutionalized nature of race or racism. So they might be comfortable on a mix-it-up day, for example, sitting with someone different in the cafeteria, being able to have a conversation, saying, I have friends of X race or Y race. But when it comes to understanding why is it that in our public school system we're seeing white students tracked into honors and AP classes at a much higher level than African American students? Why is it that when we look at our suspension and expulsion rates, we're seeing students of color, Black and Latino primarily, being suspended at much higher rates? There are systemic forces that I think young people really yearn to understand and aren't given the opportunity, and I hope that these forums can be a platform to really engage those issues.
Mm-hmm. So we hope that they will also come out and participate in those issues. Let's see if we can get one more call in. Joyce joins us from Newport News. Hi, Joyce. You're on the air.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's good that we're talking about this issue, and yes, we need to get our young people involved. But I think that the issue would be helped more if we connected with being Christian. You know, if you follow God and live your life according to His laws, then race is not going to be an issue. So perhaps we will be more successful if we try to get people to come to God and come to Jesus. And the race issue will, in my opinion, diminish because as a Christian, we love everyone.
Okay, Joyce, thank you for your call. We will be talking about race and religion, but we're going to be talking, Kelly, about all different types of religions and religious tolerance for everyone, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what the Center for the Study of Religious Freedom does is brings people of different faith perspectives together because religion can be just as divisive of an issue as race. And I'm appreciate what Joyce said, and that is wonderful that she lives out her Christian faith in a kind and compassionate and understanding way. But there are people from different faith perspectives who do the same from other perspectives. And so I think that's the point. The point is that we all come at this from different perspectives, from our own experiences, unique experiences, and we have to understand that other people are just as significant and important as we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Go ahead.
You know, the results of the participation in a program that we have in the city of Hampton called the Circles of Diversity, which were actually started by a pastor of a historically African-American Baptist church and a Monsignor of a fairly integrated Catholic church. Monsignor said that, yes, we can put on programs and teach each other's food and learn about each other's habits and customs, but it is when we sit down face to face with each other and explore our values and beliefs and traditions, listen to each other's stories, that those are the opportunities that we really have to not only recognize our differences, but to discover how much we have in common. And we have to be very careful how we orchestrate these conversations, as you have just noted, Kelly, that even though the majority of individuals here might be Christian, We have large numbers of individuals of the Muslim faith, Sikh, Buddhist, Hindu, and as a part of the circles of diversity, for the first time in the lives of individuals, they sat down with people who were not only different Christians, i.e. Baptist and Catholic, but who had very different faith traditions, i.e. Muslims and Hindus. Mm-hmm. And from that experience, they learned about each other's differences, but more importantly, what they discovered was how much those faith traditions have in common.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time, so I want to just be able to thank everyone, first of all, for participating today. I know, Eric, I'm coming to you, but I want to thank, first of all, Glenn Oder, who is the Executive Director of the Fort Monroe Authority. Glenn, we will be looking forward to our 2 town halls that will be happening in February and in April over there at Fort Monroe, and we will also see you at our 2 town halls here on the South Side, too, and to thank you for participating with us in this endeavor. So thank you so much, Glenn.
We're glad to do that.
Okay, thank you. And also Jonathan Zur, the Executive Director of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Jonathan, thank you so much for participating with us and being a partner. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, take care. And Eric, very, very quickly, you wanted to tell us something about 1619.
Yes. One thing about education and bringing out the history, Hampton University, in partnering with Norfolk State, we're hosting the Making of America Conference 1619, September 16, 2015, open to the public at Hampton University, where we're looking at the arc of social justice from 1619 to 1965, Voting Rights Act, and beyond.
Okay, that's Eric Lavelle with Hampton University. Also, Michelle Woods-Jones and Kelly Jackson with the Center for Study of Religious Freedom. Thank you so much, and we'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation, and you're listening to Another View on WHRV 89.5 FM.
And welcome back. Since her first performance at the age of 5 in her father's church to performing on stage with her 5 sisters, Juanita Wynn has loved music. She soon blossomed into writing songs for such recognizable names as Diana Ross, Angie Stone, and Destiny's Child. Now Wynn is sharing her personal story, detailing the highs and lows in her second gospel CD titled This Thing Called Life. Our Lisa Godley has her story.
I could be driving down the street when it hits me. I could be cleaning my home when it hits me.
I come from a musical family. My mother played, and I just picked up notes. It was like a no-brainer for me, and I didn't even know how it came so easy for me, but I love harmonizing. In my music and the CD that I have coming out, in the booth, sometimes I have to be careful not to just go crazy because I can hear the notes, and if I close my eyes, sometimes when I'm singing, I can see them. I guess that's the way the gift has been given to me.
She says singing with the Wynn sisters had its challenges.
There were some trying moments because I was a middle child. The older kids didn't want to be bothered with me. The younger kids, I didn't want to be bothered with them, and trying to find my place in there. Sometimes I would just have attitude, because it was like, come on, Juanita, sing, because I did most of the leading.
Juanita says as she got older, she realized she wanted to work with kids, so she decided to study child psychology in school. But to pay for it, she sang at jazz clubs on the weekends.
Somebody came in and heard me and walked over to my table and said, do you write? And I said, I don't write, I do poetry, and she was like, you ad-lib like you could write. And I said, well, I just do a little poetry. And she goes, well, I got 2 tracks for you. I want you to write. I didn't know what a track was until later. It was music tracks. And she gave me 2 tracks. She said, and see if you write something to it and just call me. My name is Tracy. And I was like, okay, you know. And, it came to me like this. I just wrote to him and called her, sang him to her over the phone. She worked for Quincy Jones Music Publishing. Next thing I knew, they flew me to Burbank, California. And I had 2 deals on the table, one with DreamWorks and one with Quincy Jones Music Publishing.
Juanita chose Quincy Jones, and that decision opened one door after another.
Angie Stone, I toured and traveled with her as background singer. Fred Hammond, toured and traveled with him and wrote for him. Destiny's Child, worked personally with Beyonce. She's amazing. Man, I worked with Bad Boy for a while as a writer. Signed to Sony ATV as a writer. Diana Ross, I wrote for her. The song was called Every Day is a New Day. Made it her title cut.
Since you went away from me, my whole life has made a change. Every day's a new day and I see.
But things haven't always come easy for Juanita Wynn. She ran away as a teen after suffering sexual abuse by a friend of the family, and later as a homeless mother of 2. She says she struggled with the decision of whether or not to tell her story that is played out in the video from her title cut, This Thing Called Life.
Cried myself to sleep so many times until the pillows now.
At first, I didn't want to. My mom, she was like, you need to just let the Lord have that and don't keep revisiting that. You're not supposed to look back. And I said, it depends on your reason for looking back. I don't look back to feel sorry for myself. I look back to remember where I came from, and so I can accurately tell the story to someone who might be going through the same thing and tell them how I survived it. Why keep it quiet? We got enough trouble going on. If you can help in any kind of way, ease the pain, go for it.
Such a beauty.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Inspirational words from Ms. Wynn. Please put Saturday, September 26th on your calendar for our first Race Let's Talk About It Community Town Hall. It will be held at the One Love Festival on the campus of Virginia Wesleyan College in the Boyd Dining Hall from 2 until 3:30. But come out early. There are lots of events going on all day for the entire family. Visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, for more information. And while you're on our website, download the podcast of today's show and share it with a friend. And we're on Facebook, so be sure to like us. Next week, we celebrate our 5th anniversary with the group that got us started, the Another View Roundtable. Happy birthday, Another View. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Jessica Jane answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a wonderful holiday weekend, everyone. Stay safe. Let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.